He carries one girl, the other clings to the dog. Each step through the storm, a fight between hope and surrender. Beneath a dying winter sky, two little girls huddle barefoot in the snow, abandoned, believing love is earned by being good. A weathered officer and his loyal German shepherd stumble upon them, unraveling a secret that will test the limits of trust, forgiveness, and quiet courage. In a world quick to turn away, what would you do if hope depended on a stranger's kindness or a dog's faith? Would you stay, or would you walk on? Tell us, has anyone's small act ever changed your life? Late winter's hush lay heavy over the edge of the little town, the kind of day when snow swallows every sound, when the sun barely struggles through clouds the color of tarnished pewter. The wind sliced along the tree line, thin, unrelenting. It whipped last year's brown leaves into ragged pirouettes, rattled dead branches, carved hollows into drifts that hugged the forest's bones. In this white silence, beneath the outstretched arms of an old oak, two small girls sat pressed close together. Their hair, tangled and wild, clung to cold cheeks. Each wore a faded, short-sleeved shirt, the sort of red that loses its heart in the wash, and threadbare skirts barely covering bare knees turned bluish-gray with cold. Their legs had long since vanished into the snow, feet curled and hidden, almost as if they'd grown roots and belonged to this frozen earth. Hazel, the elder by some silent agreement, stared down at her hands. The knuckles were cracked, pink and raw. She moved her fingers slowly, as if each motion might draw more warmth. Mina, her sister, shivered so hard her jaw trembled, and tears, thin as melting frost, slid soundlessly down her cheeks. Their voices, if they had them, were little more than a memory. The woods, a silent cathedral of white and gray, offered nothing in return. Above them, the oak's limbs clawed at the pale sky. The bark was peeling in places, sap frozen beneath. Snow had gathered in the crook of every branch, and wind rattled through, carrying the faintest whistle, a sound like something old and tired sighing its last. Beyond the trees, the world retreated, a field lost under white, a road long since erased, the suggestion of distant rooftops fading into haze. The forest here was neither friend nor foe, only an indifferent witness. Hazel leaned closer to Mina, shoulders hunched to shield her sister from the wind. She wiped a trembling hand across Mina's cheek, smearing a line of dirt into the frost. Mina blinked up, eyes glassy, and tried to curl herself smaller. Hazel wanted to say something gentle, something a mother might say, but she only managed a whisper, half caught by the wind. "We must have done something bad. That's why she left." Mina said nothing. She let the words drift away, as if the air might carry them somewhere softer. Her breath came in shallow puffs, vanishing instantly. Time in the woods does not pass the way it does in homes or schools. Here everything stretches and folds, a strange gray hour between now and never. The girls didn't cry out. There was no energy for that. Even the birds had left, save for a single crow perched high in the bare branches, watching in silence. The ache in Hazel's belly felt like an old bruise, dull and constant. She remembered the last time she'd been truly warm, the wool blanket, the humming voice, the way her mother's hands smelled faintly of flour. But that warmth had gone, slipped through the cracks, just like the songs. Mina shifted, her body seeking what little shelter Hazel could offer. The snow pressed in around them, slow and relentless. Their toes, numb and blue, had disappeared beneath the crust. Hazel pressed her own hands over Mina's, and both tried to believe this touch was enough. No footsteps approached. No car tires crunched down the vanished road. The forest's hush was absolute. The world might have ended beyond these trees, if not for the tiny movements, the fluttering fingers, the shivers, the soft whimper of Mina's breath. Someone passing by might have mistaken them for two forgotten dolls, left to keep vigil beneath the winter sky. The wind picked up, a sharp, stinging force that found every gap in their clothing. Hazel closed her eyes, tucking her chin into her chest, listening for anything that sounded like hope. A dog barking, a voice calling, the snap of a branch beneath a heavy boot. But there was nothing. Only the hush and the brittle cold, and the weight of a world that had moved on without them. A single tear slipped down Mina's cheek, catching in the corner of her mouth. She didn't wipe it away. Hazel wanted to say sorry for whatever they had done, for whatever reason they'd been left here. But the words caught, fragile and thin, and settled in the air between them like the first soft flake of a new snowfall. All around, the forest waited, holding its breath, and somewhere beyond the curtain of trees, a story had begun to move, slowly, quietly, as if waking from a long sleep. The forest changed almost imperceptibly as morning stretched on. The wind softened for a time, settling into restless sighs that brushed the snow's surface. Beneath the hush, new tracks appeared, broad, measured boot prints, and smaller, purposeful ovals pressed deep alongside them. Howard Beckett walked at his own quiet pace, every step carving a slow rhythm through the snow. Years ago, before his hair began to silver at the temples, before life settled heavy in his bones, he would have moved faster. Now, he moved with the deliberation of someone who understood the cost of both haste and hesitation. His shoulders were broad beneath the old brown jacket, his hands gloved but still red around the knuckles from the cold. There was a steadiness in the way he held himself, alert, but softened by time. At the end of a sturdy leash walked Atlas, a German shepherd with a coat the color of wet earth and blackened pine. He padded ahead, nose close to the ground, tail swaying low. Every few yards, Atlas paused, nostrils flaring, reading messages written in scents only he could decipher. His breath hung in the air, little clouds dissolving behind him. Howard's gaze lingered on the dog more than the woods. After all these years, it was Atlas who noticed things first. Howard had learned to trust these instincts. When Atlas's ears twitched and his gait quickened, Howard lengthened his stride to match. There was a subtle urgency today, a feeling just beneath the calm, a restlessness that was neither fear nor excitement. Something in the air, perhaps, or in the way the trees seemed to lean in toward the trail. A faint movement caught Atlas's attention. He slowed, body lowering almost imperceptibly, as if bowing to the silence itself. Howard stopped, heart ticking a little faster. The leash pulled taut. Atlas veered off the faint path, paws barely making a sound over the fresh snow. Howard followed without a word. They left the comfort of the trail and entered a thicket of naked branches, the old oak visible up ahead, a gnarled silhouette against the gray sky. Atlas stopped, standing still as a sentinel, his head tilted. Howard looked past him and saw them. Two little girls, huddled beneath the oak, small shapes wrapped in the shadow of the tree. Their hair stuck to their foreheads, lips purple, arms clutching each other so tightly their knuckles had gone white. For a breath, Howard thought they might be sleeping, but then one's eyes flickered open. The other shivered. Howard's mouth went dry. He crouched slowly, letting the leash slip from his hand. Atlas did not bark. He moved forward with a gentleness that seemed almost learned, stopping just out of reach, lowering his body to the girl's level. He sniffed the air, ears forward, then inched closer, pausing each time the girls tensed. The older girl, Hazel, though he didn't know her name yet, lifted her chin. Her eyes darted from Atlas to Howard and back, as if measuring which of these strangers posed the greater danger. Atlas paused, then extended his nose, a quiet offering. The smallest movement, Hazel's fingers, stiff and slow, reached out. She brushed the soft fur above Atlas's brow, hesitating as if she expected the world to shatter. Atlas stayed perfectly still. Mina, smaller and shyer, watched with wide eyes before finally allowing her hand to rest on Atlas's shoulder. In that moment, some invisible weight shifted. Howard's own heart tightened. He removed his gloves, breath catching in the cold, and knelt in the snow. He didn't speak right away. There was a reverence to this moment, an understanding that words might startle the fragile connection being forged. Instead, he gently shrugged off his heavy coat, draped it across the two girls' narrow shoulders. He pressed the last of the warmth from his body into the worn fabric, tucking the sleeves around their arms as best he could. He pulled from his pack a woolen scarf, wrapping it first around Hazel's neck, then around Mina's. His movements were careful, slow enough to show he meant no harm. Atlas lay beside the girls now, leaning his weight into their sides, offering heat. He didn't bark, didn't move, just breathed quietly, eyes half closed in trust. The world seemed to hold its breath. The girls shivered, but they no longer looked lost. Hazel tucked her face into the collar of the coat, eyes squeezed shut. Mina clung to Atlas's ruff, her cheek pressed to his fur. Howard glanced upward, the pale morning light shining through branches overhead, snowflakes floating in lazy spirals. He exhaled, steam curling into the air. For a brief, quiet moment, there was only the sound of breathing. His, Atlas's, the children's. The pain and panic and cold were not gone, but something had shifted. Survival was no longer something the girls faced alone. He checked their feet, gently pulling the smallest from the drift, brushing off frost, wrapping each in a spare wool sock from his bag. Mina whimpered as feeling returned. Howard whispered, not expecting an answer, "You're safe now." Hazel blinked, silent tears streaking her cheeks, but she didn't pull away. Atlas nudged the girls, turning to Howard, as if satisfied that the work of rescue had begun. Howard stood, sliding his gloves back on, heart aching. He knew what the cold could do to small bodies, what loneliness could do to young hearts. He reached for Mina but stopped, waiting for her nod. Slowly she lifted her arms. He scooped her up, careful to keep the coat wrapped tight. Hazel, uncertain, began to stand. Atlas pressed his nose into her palm, coaxing her upright. She rose on shaking legs, fingers twisted in Atlas's fur. Howard shouldered his bag, one arm around Mina, the other holding Hazel's hand. Atlas padded ahead, his body broad and warm, a living shield. Howard looked back, for just a moment, at the hollow beneath the oak, the place where pain and hope had first crossed. Then, with slow steps, they left the clearing behind. No one spoke. There was no need. The world was cold and hard and empty, but not as empty as it had been. And as they disappeared among the trees, two girls, one officer, one dog, footprints traced a quiet promise in the snow. You are not alone. The world seemed to shrink to the crunch of boots in the snow and the hush of shallow breathing. Each step away from the old oak, a slow surrender to exhaustion and hope. Howard held Mina cradled against his chest, her head tucked under his chin, the wool coat wrapped tight around both their bodies. Hazel, small but stubborn, walked close. One mittened hand gripped in his own, the other buried in the thick fur at the scruff of Atlas's neck. She never let go. Atlas led the way, his stride steady, paws breaking a path through drifts that sometimes rose nearly to his belly. The dog's movements were deliberate, almost patient. He would forge ahead, then pause to glance over his shoulder, eyes searching for Hazel's small face, for Howard's reassuring nod. His tail never wagged, but he stayed close, each pause a silent question. Is everyone still here? The woods offered no comfort, only an endless repetition of white and brown and the muted gray of a sky unwilling to show the sun. Wind scraped ice from the bare birches and sent it spinning into the air, but among the trees, all was still. The deeper they moved into the forest, the more the sounds of distant roads and town faded, swallowed by snow and old pine needles. Sometimes a bird would cry far off, just once, sharp and lonely, and the sound would die before it reached them. Howard could feel Mina's shivers, the frail thump of her heart under layers of wool. He shifted her in his arms, careful, murmured a few words meant only to soothe. He wasn't sure she heard, but her grip on his collar tightened all the same. Hazel's footsteps stumbled at first, but each time she faltered, Atlas would press his body gently against her side, offering support. The gesture was almost imperceptible, as if he understood that too much help would break her pride. Too little would leave her behind. No one spoke. Howard felt the ache in his arms, the heaviness of duty and something softer, an old ache, familiar and haunting. He'd carried men from firefights, shouldered friends through floods and fires, but he could not remember ever carrying something so fragile as this little girl with her wild hair and silent tears, or guiding someone so wounded as the sister trailing at his side. Time blurred as they moved. Every now and then, the forest would open just a little, revealing the faint outline of a path, a patch of frozen creek, or the ghostly remains of a fence. The wind rose and fell, moaning through the branches, but Howard pressed on, counting every step, matching Atlas's pace. He watched his breath puff out in quick clouds, fading into the vast quiet. They passed the remains of an old log, nearly lost under snow, and Howard felt Hazel's fingers squeeze tighter. She stumbled, and Atlas, without command, slowed, let her lean into his warmth. Mina let out a thin, drowsy sound, not quite a word. Howard shifted his hold, whispering, "Almost there, just a little longer." His voice barely reached above the wind. Atlas's ears flicked. He turned, waiting until all three had closed the gap, then continued, nose low, guiding them through a shallow dip in the land. The woods grew denser, shadows stretching long across the snow. Howard felt the familiar tug of muscle memory. He had walked this loop 100 times with Atlas, sometimes to clear his head, sometimes to run from memories. Never like this. Through a gap in the trees, the cabin finally appeared, a huddled shape against the pale hillside, smoke curling from the stone chimney in a wavering line. The windows glowed faintly amber against the blue snow, the light inside soft and alive. Howard felt a weight slip from his shoulders, just a little. Mina stirred, eyes opening as if drawn by the promise of warmth. Hazel stopped, staring at the house as though she couldn't quite believe it was real. Atlas stopped too and waited. When Hazel looked down at him, he pressed his nose to her mitten, a silent reminder that she was not alone. Howard paused at the bottom of the steps, shifting Mina to one arm so he could free his hand. The old boards creaked beneath his boots as he mounted the porch. Hazel hesitated at the threshold. Atlas nudged her forward, then sat beside her as if to say, "I will not go in without you." For a long, quiet moment, Hazel simply stared at the door. Howard waited, breathing slowly, the warmth from inside brushing his face as he opened the door a crack. The scent of wood smoke and simmering broth floated out, meeting the bitter air. He looked at Hazel, offered a small nod. No rush, no pressure, just an open door. Hazel took a breath, then stepped inside, Atlas on her heels. The cabin embraced them, its heat, its clutter, its promise. Howard stepped in last, closing the door behind them with a soft click, shutting out the cold and the world. Atlas shook snow from his coat, then lay down at Hazel's feet. Howard gently lowered Mina onto a worn patchwork rug, covered her with a thick blanket, and knelt beside her. Hazel, suddenly uncertain, hovered near Atlas, her hand still tangled in his fur. Howard said nothing more. In that hush, with snow drifting down outside and the world reduced to warmth and breathing and the slow settling of bodies in safe places, there was room for hope to take root, quiet, trembling, but real. Inside the cabin, the air shifted, no longer icy and hollow, but tinged with warmth and wood smoke, as if every breath carried a faint hope of comfort. The stove, tucked in the far corner, hissed quietly. It cast an amber light over the faded wallpaper and the simple pine table scattered with half-read newspapers and a chipped mug. Boots lined up neatly by the door. Jackets hung like shadows on old nails. In here, the world was reduced to the soft crackle of fire, the scent of wool drying near the stove, the familiar shapes of ordinary things. Mina let herself sink into the thick blanket, her face pinched and pale, legs curled toward her chest. Her breathing was quick, but slower now, steadying with each minute away from the wind. Hazel hovered nearby, eyes darting from Howard to the walls to Atlas, taking in everything and nothing. Atlas stretched out along the rug, leaving just enough space for both girls to press against his side. He lowered his head, nose buried in his paws, but his eyes stayed open, watching. Howard worked with a gentle, learned efficiency. He fetched an old kettle, filled it with water, and set it on the stove. He moved without unnecessary noise, always glancing back to the children, measuring their silence. He found a basin, a soft towel, and a battered tin of salve he kept for Atlas's paws in winter. He knelt beside Mina first, hands slow and careful as he unwrapped her from the blanket. Mina shrank at his touch, flinched as he rolled up her skirt and peeled the sodden socks from her feet. Her toes were purple, the skin pale and puffy, the smallest hint of blood where a nail had cracked. Howard said nothing, only dipped the towel in warm water, wrung it out, and cupped her foot in his hand. He cleaned away the dirt and snow, the sharp tang of cold lingering in the air. Mina's fingers clenched in the blanket, but she made no sound. When he finished, he dabbed a little salve onto each toe and wrapped both feet in thick, dry wool. He found a pair of his own socks, far too big, but warm, and slipped them on her. He did the same for Hazel, who tried to keep her face brave, who blinked back the sting of tears as the heat reached her skin. Howard looked at her, saw the way she bit her lip, and simply nodded once as if to say, "You're doing well." He left them then, just for a moment, to find soup he'd left simmering on the stove that morning. He ladled it into 2 old bowls, set them on the floor beside the girls, The broth steamed, cloudy with barley and carrot, and the faintest memory of chicken. Hazel stared at it, uncertain, until Atlas shifted and nudged her hand. He didn't beg, didn't even look at the bowl, just pressed his warmth into her until she picked up the spoon. Mina sipped first, then Hazel. They ate in small, slow bites, the rhythm of the meal as delicate as a lullaby. Howard stayed back, sitting at the edge of the kitchen, not wanting to crowd the space. He wrote something down in a notebook. His hands, more comfortable with forms than with feelings, recorded each small improvement. Color returning to Mina's cheeks, the tremor leaving Hazel's hands. Outside, dusk thickened, blue shadows pressing against the frosted windows. The wind rose and fell. Once a branch knocked against the siding, and both girls started. Atlas lifted his head, ears pricked, then relaxed, a living barrier between them and the world. Hazel pressed her face into his side. Mina curled up so close that the dog's breath ruffled her hair. Howard found an old towel in the closet, thin but soft with age, and passed it over, keeping his voice low. Hazel took it without looking at him, dried Mina's face, then her own. Howard set a stack of folded shirts and sweaters nearby, things he'd saved, thinking he might need them for a neighbor's child or a cousin visiting for a holiday that never came. He turned his back as the girls changed, pretending to fuss with a lantern. Atlas waited, patient and quiet, never moving far. When the girls had finished, Hazel found her place beside Mina, and both leaned in toward the dog, eyes heavy, bodies worn to the bone. Night fell fully. Howard set a log on the fire, the flames lighting the cabin gold. He placed another blanket over the girls, then sat nearby. Not too close, not too far. He could hear their breathing, even and slow now, and the smallest whimpers that lingered in their sleep. Atlas did not sleep. He watched the door, then the windows, then back to the girls, as if promising he would keep this small circle safe as long as it took. Howard pulled a battered chair close to the stove, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold. He watched the three of them, dog, child, wrapped in patchwork and silence. He tried not to think of what the night outside might bring. Instead, he counted their breaths. Let the rhythm anchor him. Let it say what words never could. Here, for now, there is warmth. Here, for now, no one is left behind. The fire flickered. Atlas's eyes glowed in the dark. The world outside howled and waited. Inside, a small light endured. The night deepened, pressing against the small windows, carrying with it the secrets of the woods and the hush of falling snow. Inside, the fire had settled to a steady, low glow, just enough to cast flickering light across the floorboards and the small bundle of blankets near the hearth. Hazel and Mina slept curled against each other, Atlas's long body wedged between them and the door, a silent guardian who blinked slowly at every unfamiliar sound. Howard moved quietly through the cabin, tending the last of the chores, checking the lock on the back door, making sure a pot of water stayed warm on the stove. He paused often, listening, waiting for some sign that the world outside might intrude. But the only sounds were the wind and the faint, contented sighs of sleep. It was well past midnight when Hazel woke. She sat upright with a suddenness that betrayed the shape of her dreams, eyes wide, chest rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. Mina whimpered and turned in her sleep, but did not wake. Hazel's hand sought Atlas's ruff, clutching tight. The dog lifted his head, looked at her, then rested his chin back on his paws with a patient, steady weight. For a long time, Hazel simply watched the fire, tracing with her eyes the pattern of the old quilt, the dance of flame on the knotty pine walls. Howard saw her from his place at the table, where he'd been pretending to write in his notebook, but had really only been counting the minutes. He didn't speak. Instead, he stood, fetched a mug of warm water, and set it down on the table's edge, close enough to reach, far enough not to intrude. Hazel slid out from beneath the blanket. The old wool socks swallowed her feet, making her steps quiet. She stopped by the table, eyes fixed on the mug. Howard said nothing, just nodded once and returned to the fire. After a minute, Hazel's whisper floated into the air, thin, almost lost in the crackle of the stove. "Mama's name is Evelyn." Her voice caught on the last syllable. She glanced down, studying her fingers, then continued, barely louder than a breath. "I'm Hazel. My sister is Mina." She looked up at Howard, searching for something he couldn't name. He offered a small, tired smile. "Hazel," he repeated gently, as if the sound of her name might help anchor her to this place. Atlas watched the exchange, tail thumping quietly once against the rug. Hazel knelt beside him, burying her face in his neck. When she pulled away, she held something small and faded, an old handkerchief, edges frayed, the once white fabric gone yellow with time and the work of small hands. There was a mark embroidered in one corner, a crooked letter E, barely holding its blue thread. Hazel pressed it into Howard's palm, her eyes wide and solemn. "Mama gave it to me. She said if we ever got lost, I should show it to someone. Someone good." Howard turned the handkerchief over in his hands, feeling the roughness of the stitches. He glanced down at Atlas, at the old leather collar still buckled around the dog's neck. On the brass bell, almost hidden by fur, was a matching E, the same careful, clumsy loop. A strange current ran through Howard, a sense of coincidence shifting into meaning. He set the handkerchief gently on the table, then went to his desk and opened an old, battered file box. For years he had kept it mostly out of habit, full of incident reports, missing persons bulletins, notes scribbled on receipts and scraps of paper. He leafed through the stack, fingers lingering over names and photographs. There, near the back, was a report he remembered reading months ago. A woman named Evelyn Holt, missing from the outskirts of town. 2 daughters, last seen wearing red shirts, possible domestic trouble at home. No one had followed up in a long time. Howard sat with the file open on his lap. Hazel stood at his elbow, eyes following his every move. She didn't ask questions, just watched. Atlas, sensing the shift, settled his head in her lap. There was more. Old news clippings about a trailer park on the edge of the county. Stories of families who came and went. The occasional call for help that never seemed urgent enough for anyone to stay long. Howard recognized a symbol drawn on the side of one battered report. The same E, scratched onto the mailbox in a grainy photograph. He closed the file slowly, setting it aside. Hazel pressed her hand to the bell on Atlas's collar, tracing the letter with her fingertip. She didn't cry. Instead, her voice was small, barely above the sigh of the fire. "She told us to wait. She said she'd be back. But it got so cold." Howard looked away, throat tight. He felt the weight of all the nights he'd spent walking this forest, never knowing who might need him. He wished, not for the first time, that the world gave children answers instead of silences. For a long while, no one spoke. Hazel curled into Atlas's side, eyelids heavy. The handkerchief and the file sat together on the table, a quiet bridge between what had been lost and what might still be found. Outside, The snow continued to fall, gentle, unhurried, erasing footprints and softening every sharp edge. Inside, the secret had found a name, and hope flickered, almost too fragile to name. The night refused to settle, as if the storm itself sensed something had shifted within the little cabin. Each gust pressed more urgently at the window panes, making the flames in the stove flicker against the far wall. Shadows slid across Hazel's sleeping face. Mina, curled tightly beneath the blanket, whimpered once, then fell still again. Atlas raised his head each time the wind rose, ears tilting, nose twitching. Howard, unable to sleep, sat at the table and watched the darkness beyond the glass. He had checked the locks twice, out of old habit, but found himself rising again, drawn to the door by a quiet unease. The world outside was a void. No moon, no stars, only the pale gleam of snow reflecting what little light the cabin offered. He stood for a moment, listening. In the hush, his own breathing sounded too loud. He pressed his palm to the door's frame, the old wood cool and reassuring. Atlas moved silently through the room, claws clicking softly on the worn planks, body low and taut. He stopped near the girls, then drifted to the door, tail stiff. Howard met the dog's gaze and understood. Something was not right. He set down his mug and slipped on his boots, careful not to wake the girls. He unlatched the old shotgun from above the door, a gesture more of routine than threat, and leaned it nearby, just out of sight. He dimmed the lantern until the cabin glowed only faintly, leaving corners thick with shadow. For a moment, everything was still. Then, just beyond the glass, a shape flickered, a shifting of black against deeper black, a figure too tall for any animal, too hesitant for a neighbor. Howard's heart stuttered. Atlas pressed his nose to the crack under the door and gave a low, warning growl. Not loud, not menacing, but unmistakable. The figure paused at the edge of the clearing, hovering in the uncertain half-light cast by the stove. Howard watched as it shifted, then stepped closer, slow and cautious. There was no knock. The figure lingered by the window, breath fogging the glass, eyes searching the dimness inside. Howard moved quietly to the girls, pulling their blanket higher. He knelt beside them, body between them and the door, one hand resting gently on Mina's small back. Hazel stirred, eyes opening to the darkness. She did not speak. Atlas slid between them, his body a living shield. The silence pressed in, broken only by the groan of a distant branch and the occasional hiss of snow falling from the eaves. Howard watched the window, saw the shape draw back, then vanish into the deeper dark beyond the porch. He waited, counted each heartbeat, measured the hush. Minutes dragged, the girl's breathing steadied. Atlas kept his gaze on the door, unmoving except for the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest. Howard listened, senses straining for the sound of footsteps crunching over snow, the subtle scrape of boots against ice. Nothing came, but danger lingered, heavy as smoke. The cabin's four walls felt thin, every gust of wind now an echo of some threat outside. Howard did not let himself relax. He stood and slid the bolt quietly across the back door, checked the windows, drew the curtain tighter over the glass. He sat with his back against the wall, the shotgun close, watching Atlas watch the door. Time became elastic. Moments stretched, then folded back on themselves. Hazel watched Howard, her eyes too wide, her silence brimming with questions she did not voice. Mina stirred, found Hazel's hand in the darkness, and clung to it. Howard leaned forward, voice low, no more than a breath. Shh, it's all right. I'm here. Atlas is here. Hazel nodded once, her hand wrapped around the bell on Atlas's collar. Outside, the snow fell heavier, muting every trace. The shape did not return. But Howard knew the woods, knew the patience of hunger, of fear, of those with nowhere left to run. He kept watch through the slow hours, eyes never leaving the window. Atlas, finally, curled against the girls and slept in short bursts, always waking to check the door, the shadows, the wind. Howard thought of the handkerchief, the old letter E, the quiet courage of a child pressing hope into the hand of a stranger. He looked at Hazel and Mina, saw them breathe in tandem, as if in sleep they could share the burden of the cold, the fear, the long, unfinished story. Outside, a single crow called into the night. The sound was swallowed quickly by the wind. Inside, the fire held its ground. The little family, man, dog, children, sat together waiting for dawn, for danger to pass, for the promise of another day. No words were needed. Every breath, every heartbeat, every silent watch was a vow. You are not alone, not now, not ever again. Dawn came slowly, a faint suggestion before the sun, coaxing blue light through cracks in the frost-etched glass. The cabin's quiet deepened in that hour before waking, a hush that felt both fragile and dense, every sound outside muffled by heavy drifts of new snow. Howard remained by the window, his gaze never quite leaving the tree line, senses tuned to any shift in the world beyond the walls. Atlas stirred first, his body untangling from sleep in a series of small, purposeful movements. He rose, shook, sniffed at the base of the door. His ears twitched toward the woods. Hazel and Mina, still wrapped together on the rug, slept on, each clutching the other's hand, as if it were the only thing left to anchor them. Howard watched Atlas's posture, the way the dog's body became a question, a signal, a silence pressed in, then a sound. Just outside, the faintest hesitant crunch of snow beneath boots, followed by a pause, then another step. Atlas stiffened. His tail rose, not in aggression, but in warning. Howard's heart tightened. He rose quietly, careful not to wake the girls, and moved to the door. He placed a calming hand on Atlas's back. The old shotgun rested in the crook of his arm, more for comfort than threat. He listened. The footsteps circled the cabin, cautious, stopping beneath the kitchen window. A moment later, a shadow flickered, a shape bent low, breath fogging the glass. Howard glimpsed a gaunt face, hood drawn up, movements nervous and hurried. Then the figure retreated, tracks leading away toward the brush, but not gone, not truly leaving. Atlas's hackles rose, a low growl rumbling deep in his chest. Hazel stirred at the sound, blinking awake, her gaze darting from Atlas to Howard, then to the window, where the shadow of their fear remained. Howard moved quickly. He tucked the girls into their coats and boots, Hazel helping Mina, both silent, their movements mechanical with exhaustion and anxiety. He pulled food and water into a battered rucksack, stuffed in a first aid kit, an extra blanket, the old handkerchief with its blue E. Atlas circled them, nose pressed to the door, as if reading a message written in the air. Howard radioed for backup, voice low but steady, the crackle of static answering him. A snowbound voice replied, promising a team would make their way as soon as the plows reached the old logging road. But Howard knew how far away help could be, how the world narrowed in crisis to what you could carry, whom you could protect. There would be no waiting. He strapped the pack to his shoulder, opened the door. The morning cold bit instantly, slicing through the last remnants of night. The girls crowded close, clinging to Howard's sides, Atlas pressed between them, leading, guiding, his body a silent barrier. They moved quickly, following Atlas through the thickest line of trees, taking the old path toward the main road. The snow reached high, slowing their steps. Howard kept his eyes on the tracks, those fresh, uncertain footprints, too small for a man, too large for a child. He felt the old rhythm of pursuit in his veins, calm, focused, patient. Halfway to the clearing, the forest broke open. The figure from the window reappeared, stepping from behind a cluster of pine. A woman, face hollow, coat oversized, eyes darting. She blocked the path, hands raised but trembling, words lost to the wind. She called out something sharp, but Howard didn't hear, didn't need to. The girls shrank behind him. Atlas placed himself between them and the stranger, body rigid, tail out, eyes never leaving the threat. The woman, her voice cracked, moved closer, desperate. Howard stepped forward, planting his boots in the snow, keeping his body wide. "No closer," he said quietly, voice even, sure. His words hung in the cold. Atlas let out a sound, a warning, deep and certain, his fur bristling. The woman hesitated, then lunged, not at Howard, but toward the girls. Atlas launched forward, blocking her, forcing her back. There was no violence, just movement. A wall of fur and will and loyalty. The woman fell to her knees, sobbing. Howard stayed between her and the girls, the shotgun now at his side, unthreatening but present. In the distance, a siren's wail floated through the trees, thin but growing. The rescue team, closer now. The woman's energy broke, fear replaced by defeat. She sat in the snow, hands limp in her lap, the storm inside her finally spent. Howard called the girls to him. Mina clung to his coat, Hazel holding tightly to Atlas's collar, eyes never leaving the woman. Howard bent, his voice almost a whisper. "It's over. She can't hurt you now." Atlas licked Hazel's hand, and for the first time she didn't pull away. Soon, uniformed figures appeared between the trees. Faces familiar, voices calm, movements slow and careful. They surrounded the woman, spoke to her, guided her gently away. Howard watched, the tension ebbing, replaced by exhaustion, gratitude, a grief too deep for words. He gathered the girls close. Atlas pressed to their side. The four of them together in the hush that followed danger, a hush that promised safety for now. Above them, the snow fell softer, a benediction. No one cheered, no one celebrated. There was only breath, heartbeats, the quiet certainty that this circle, officer, dog, children, had held. For a long while after the sirens faded, the woods held a silence so complete it felt almost sacred. The officers who came wore their uniforms heavy with snow and with years. Their voices were soft, measured, full of apology for having arrived late, but full of relief all the same. They moved through the clearing with care, not to startle, not to disturb the fragile peace settling after the storm. One by one, they checked the girls, gentle hands, murmured names, blankets laid over shivering shoulders. Mina did not speak. Hazel only nodded. Her eyes fixed on Atlas, who sat pressed close to her knee, tail still, ears turned toward every new sound. The cabin was suddenly too full. Radios crackled, boots scuffed the old wooden floor. Strangers moved in and out with quiet efficiency. Howard hovered near the girls, his presence as constant as Atlas's, his voice rare but steady when needed. Someone handed him a cup of coffee he did not drink. He set it aside, hands restless, gaze never straying far from Hazel and Mina. Hours drifted by. The rescue team brought food, checked vital signs. spoke in hushed tones with Howard about the woman they'd taken into custody. There were questions, so many questions, but Howard answered them with as few words as possible. He shielded the girls from the noise, from the well-meaning crowding, keeping their small circle intact. Atlas did the same, his body a barrier, his gaze patient and unwavering. As dusk began to settle, the world outside took on a soft violet hue. Snow still falling in gentle, silent flakes. A car arrived, old, battered, its tires crunching over the icy lane. From the back seat emerged a woman, hair the color of coffee, tied in a loose, hurried knot, her face pale but alive with hope and fear. Evelyn. She stood on the threshold, gloved hands pressed to her heart, breath caught, as if the act of seeing the cabin might wake her from a long and terrible dream. She did not rush. Instead, she stepped forward, her boots slow and unsteady on the frozen path. Each breath left her lips in a cloud. The officers stepped aside, some nodding gently, some turning away to give space to what was about to unfold. Inside, Hazel saw her first. The girl's body went still, her hand tightening around Mina's. Her eyes searched the woman's face, afraid to believe, afraid to be wrong. Mina, sensing the change in her sister, looked up, blinking away tears she had not let fall all day. Evelyn knelt in the doorway, as if the weight of the world had dropped her to her knees. Her eyes were wide, shining with unshed tears. For a moment she did not speak, only stared, memorizing the curve of Hazel's jaw, the stubborn tilt of Mina's chin, the threadbare red shirts still clinging to their small frames. Hazel took the first step, slow and uncertain. Mina followed, one hand gripping her sister's sleeve. They crossed the short distance, two small girls moving through a haze of fear and hope and memory. Evelyn opened her arms. The girls hesitated only a moment, then tumbled into her embrace. Hazel buried her face in her mother's coat, the fabric catching her sobs. Mina pressed her cheek to Evelyn's chest, breath hitching, body trembling, as if each moment she might dissolve. No one spoke. There was only the sound of wind against the eaves, of three hearts beating together after too long apart. Evelyn rocked the girls gently, her own tears falling into their hair. She whispered their names, Hazel, Mina, over and over, as if the words themselves could undo the nights lost in snow. Howard watched from the edge of the room, hands tucked into his pockets, shoulders hunched against emotion. Atlas sat at his side, tail gently thumping the floor, eyes soft. Hazel looked up finally, seeking Atlas. She reached out, her hand resting on the dog's head. Atlas pressed into the touch, and in that moment, something in Hazel's face relaxed, as if permission had finally been granted to let go. Evelyn looked up at Howard, gratitude etched in every line of her face. She mouthed words she could not yet say, thank you, but he only shook his head, offering a small, tired smile. The officers cleared the room, leaving the family a hush, closing the door against the world. In the amber glow of the cabin, beneath the weight of memory and miracle, the girls found sleep in their mother's arms for the first time in what felt like forever. Atlas lay close, one paw on Mina's blanket, as if to anchor the moment against the threat of night. Howard stepped outside, breath steaming, staring into the gentle snowfall. He listened to the quiet, the fragile peace, the first laughter rising, soft and halting, from behind the closed door. And in that gentle dusk, for the first time in years, he felt something close to home. Winter loosened its grip one small hour at a time. Days lengthened imperceptibly, first by a handful of minutes, then a full hour, until the forest outside Howard's cabin glowed pale and blue even in late afternoon. The world did not heal in an instant. Instead, the days stitched themselves together with small, almost invisible acts of care. Hazel and Mina stayed close to their mother in those first days, drifting only as far as the reach of her hand. Evelyn spoke in quiet tones, often smoothing the girl's hair, her thumb brushing the worry from Hazel's brow. Each night, she tucked them into bed with the careful gentleness of a mother reacquainting herself with rituals almost lost. Some nights Mina woke crying, dreams tangled in snow and empty woods. Hazel would climb beneath her blanket, arms wrapped tight around her little sister, until sleep returned. Howard kept his presence steady but unintrusive. He fixed things in the house that needed fixing, oiling a door hinge, mending a loose floorboard, stacking logs by the stove. He did not force conversation, never asked the girls to talk about what had happened. His voice found them in small ways, a question about their favorite soup, an offer to sharpen Hazel's colored pencils, a soft humming as he swept the porch. Atlas became the quiet center of the household. Each morning, Hazel and Mina waited at the door as Howard attached Atlas's leash. The dog would nose their hands in greeting, tail low and soft. The three would walk slowly beneath the thinning pines, Hazel's fingers tangled in Atlas's fur, Mina trailing behind, face tilted to the light, as if relearning the shape of sky. After each walk, the girls would settle on the steps, knees pulled to their chests, and brush Atlas's coat with an old comb Howard found in a drawer. The gentle, rhythmic strokes smoothed both dog and child. Sometimes Hazel whispered secrets into Atlas's ear, her lips barely moving. Mina fashioned a crown from brittle grass, pressing it carefully between Atlas's ears. He bore it with the patience of an old king, eyes closing in quiet satisfaction. Inside, laughter returned in fits and starts. Hazel found a box of jigsaw puzzles and, with Howard's encouragement, spread the pieces across the kitchen table. Evelyn would join, kneeling beside Mina, sorting edge pieces, smiling at her daughter's small victories. The house filled with the sound of living, dishes clinking, the snap of cards, the soft thud of Atlas's tail. No one spoke of the woods or the woman who had haunted their sleep. Howard learned to make new meals, following recipes clipped from old magazines. He burnt the first batch of pancakes, but Hazel giggled and ate them anyway. Mina painted her pancakes with syrup, face sticky and content. Evelyn stood by the window, arms folded, the smallest hint of relief softening the lines beside her eyes. At dusk, the family would sit on the front steps, wrapped in shared blankets. The girls would rest their heads on their mother's shoulders, Atlas curled at their feet, Howard perched on the rail, mug in hand. Sometimes Evelyn would hum a lullaby, barely above a whisper. Sometimes silence felt more generous than song. Gradually, the girls' sleep grew deeper, their voices brighter. Hazel asked Howard about the stars, why they looked colder in winter, why some seemed to move. Mina gathered small treasures from the yard, an acorn, a piece of smooth quartz, and arranged them on the mantel. The ordinary became sacred, the feel of sun on a cheek, the warm press of a dog's body at night. Neighbors from the edge of town stopped by. They brought casseroles, hand-me-down coats, books for the girls. No one lingered too long. There was an unspoken understanding that healing needed room, that some wounds closed best in the company of those who'd shared the winter. Howard found himself opening in ways he hadn't expected. He showed Hazel and Mina how to patch a tear in a sleeve, how to split wood without splinters, how to find the first green shoots beneath old leaves. Evelyn offered to help in the kitchen, and soon the smell of bread baking filled the cabin, carrying memories that belonged to all of them. Atlas, for his part, watched over the girls as the days brightened. On evenings when the wind picked up, he would lie in the narrow hallway outside their door, paws crossed, eyes half closed, a steady presence in the shifting quiet. Spring was not yet here, but the house breathed easier. The family, pieced together from strangers and circumstance, moved through each day with a slowness that was not caution, but reverence. Sometimes in the fading light, Howard would catch sight of Hazel and Mina dancing in the patchy snow, arms linked, Atlas circling them with a kind of delighted awe. He would turn away, not to hide his smile, but to let the moment belong only to them, and always, after the lamps were turned low, after the world outside fell silent again, the little cabin held the promise that even after the longest winter, warmth and light would find their way home. The world outside the little cabin softened, first in light and then in mood, as winter yielded to a gentler season. By the end of March, the town's gravel roads were threaded with damp, the snow retreating in uneven patches to reveal pale grass beneath. Children's voices echoed from porches. Laundry lines sagged beneath blankets and coats hung out to claim the sun. Word of what had happened in the woods traveled quietly, as things do in small towns. Passed in the grocery aisle, at the gas pump, between neighbors leaning on rakes as they watched the frost lift from their yards. No one told the story the same way. Some spoke of Howard's steadfastness, others of the little girl's silent courage, but, most of all, people remembered Atlas, the dog whose patient watch had changed everything. One afternoon, the mayor called Howard, voice sheepish with the discomfort of official business. Would he and the girls and their mother, if they were willing, join the community for a gathering at the town hall? Nothing grand, just a thank you. Howard nearly said no, unused to ceremony, but Hazel and Mina looked at him with expectant eyes, and Evelyn's gentle nod made the answer for him. The town hall stood at the edge of Main Street, white paint peeling, the roof patched more times than anyone could count. Inside, folding chairs lined the walls, sunlight streaked across a worn floor, and the scent of cinnamon and baking bread hung in the air. Neighbors drifted in, arms full of pie and bouquets and brown paper parcels tied with string. The gathering was not loud. There were no speeches at first, just soft voices, handshakes, the awkward joy of people who have survived a long winter together. Some brought gifts for Hazel and Mina, a painted stone, a book of fairy tales, a hand-knitted scarf. The girls accepted each one shyly, cheeks coloring, eyes bright. At the center of it all, Atlas lay with quiet dignity, children kneeling around him, tracing the line of his back, plaiting daisies into his collar. Howard watched, shoulders slightly hunched, as the dogs soaked up their adoration without complaint. Evelyn sat close, her hand always resting somewhere on one daughter's shoulder, her smile fragile but real. When the time came, the mayor called the room to quiet. He spoke simply about kindness, about being seen, about the stubborn grace of not leaving anyone behind. He thanked Howard and the girls and Evelyn, and then bent to pin a small medallion, shaped like a paw, onto Atlas's collar. "Dog of the Year," the mayor read aloud, and for a moment everyone laughed, a sound as bright as any bell. Howard was called forward too. He stood with hands in his pockets, face reddening under the praise. The sheriff clapped him on the shoulder, murmured words only he could hear. Howard met the gaze of neighbors he'd known for decades, and some he'd never spoken to, and in their eyes he saw recognition, not of a hero, but of a man who had simply stayed when it mattered. Afterward, people lingered, reluctant to let the spell break. Hazel and Mina moved through the crowd with growing confidence, their laughter a quiet miracle. Atlas, now adorned with his medal and a garland of purple crocus, padded after them, pausing whenever a small hand reached to touch his side. That evening, the family returned to the cabin. Howard grilled cheese sandwiches for supper, burnt around the edges. But nobody cared. The girls took turns reading aloud from their new book, voices stumbling, giggling, then rising stronger together. Evelyn brewed tea, her movements slow and unhurried, as if she had all the time in the world. After the girls fell asleep, Evelyn cleared the cups and joined Howard on the porch. Atlas curled at their feet, nose twitching in his sleep. The stars were brighter than they had been all winter. They sat in silence a long time, the kind that needs no explanation. Howard broke it at last. Voice rough but gentle, "We never needed to be heroes." Evelyn nodded. "No, just here." Howard glanced down at Atlas, whose ears flicked in his dreams. He was always here. Evelyn's hand found his on the porch rail, a small warmth in the cool night. Inside, Hazel and Mina slept easy, their dreams untroubled. Outside, the world waited for morning, a pale ribbon of hope stretching over the trees. And when dawn crept over the horizon, the first light shone through the cabin window, catching on the metal at Atlas's throat, gilding the walls, painting everything with the quiet knowledge that sometimes, to stay is the bravest thing of all. Howard watched as Hazel and Mina burst out the door, Atlas close behind, their laughter trailing through the fresh grass. He smiled, a quiet, private smile, and understood. It was never about rescue. It was about staying, about belonging, about holding fast in the cold until, at last, the world grew warm again. In the quiet after the storm, the true miracles are rarely loud. Sometimes healing arrives as a loyal dog resting his head in a child's lap, or a neighbor who simply stays through the long winter. It's not grand gestures, but the quiet courage to care, to wait, to believe in one more morning that turns strangers into family and a cold cabin into home. Perhaps the bravest thing we ever do is to hold on for someone who's lost and to let ourselves be found. Sometimes it's a child's small hand in yours. Sometimes it's a gentle nudge from an old dog who never gave up. What moment of quiet kindness has shaped your own story or restored your hope in difficult times? We'd love to hear your thoughts below, because every story of staying, of healing, makes this world a little warmer for someone else.